What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle, presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there is no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday it is now. I'm your host, Maddy. As I posted on X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it, I'm still calling it Twitter. Yesterday, I'm going to move my episodes. They're usually come out on Tuesday and Friday. If you've been following along with this show since its inception last May, I've been doing a Tuesday, Friday format primarily, but with the format of Tulane spring practice being Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, it just feels a little more natural for me to come back after a fresh day of practice and be able to give my observations that are built off of what my first impressions were, now to be kind of building off of that. Looking forward into week 3, all of that spiel to say, I'm going to be moving my episodes to Wednesday and Friday temporarily throughout the spring camp. So let's get into it. I know that I've been doing my interviews with players as Tulane's Pro Day is approaching, and I'm in that time period where I still want to be covering these guys that are going on to the draft and are still doing these great things. But there is so much to unpack with Tulane football. As I said in my episode after the first day, that was the first day I've ever really showed up to Yeoman Stadium with a notebook at hand, just not really having a sense of what the wide receiver groupings are going to be like, who's playing on the offensive line, who is playing in the entirety of the secondary, because really there is Bailey Despaney from last season, and that's it. Who's going to be starting linebacker opposite Tyler Grubbs, barring, any setbacks for Jesus Machado. I'm not entirely sure what his timeline is, but I don't expect that to be a long-term issue. I just don't know that well. And then figuring out the defensive line as well. I mean, quite frankly, the only group that seems entirely nailed out to me at this point in time is running back. And you're actually kind of getting a sense of that room as well. All that to say, I get there every day and it's kind of difficult. Do I pay attention to the quarterback competition? Do I look at how the wide receivers are doing down the field? It's a little easier said than done when we're covering one-on-one drills, but in 7-on-7s, I'm a defense person. And today my eyes kind of primarily stayed on the offense. All that to say, it's really a daily thing for me and just kind of feeling out what I should be kind of looking at. And with every group having its own question marks, I'm kind of just trying to do all of this holistically while also getting a sense of what the new leadership is like, what the culture at Tulane is, any similarities or holdovers, things that we are kind of familiar with from the previous coaching staff, and how do you really set expectations, build that culture, and set that standard in the spring when the stakes are relatively low and you're really lacking that leader at the top on the team without a starting quarterback. We saw when we spoke with John Summerall after practice today, he was a little critical of the lack of physicality on Saturday. I thought it showed that the standard is extremely high, but we're still a long way away from the opening kickoff, and I'm going to unpack all of that on today's show. Again, I am a one-woman show. I do have my intern, Kenzie Mitchell, who has been there with me and has given me really great notes at spring camp as well. But ultimately, we're 4 days in. I've tried to kind of take stock of some of the lineups. And as I said in the beginning, and as I'm sure a lot of you that follow along with this show and know who I am, know that I'm typically inclined to look at defense first, especially secondaries, being that, I played center back in soccer. I've kind of equated that to playing in the secondary in a way. And just that's where I've been doing the scouting academy at defensive back and defensive line. So the first couple of days, it was where my eyes were drawn. And if I could make really just I'm not going to make any projections 4 days into spring camp because that is absurd, but I think it's safe to say that Jalen Geiger, one of the transfer safeties over from Kentucky, is kind of slotting into that one spot opposite Bailey Despaney, and his size just sticks out to me. His ability to locate the ball when they're turning their hips in those types of drills. He just has really solid hands and good eye discipline on the quarterback and really good just technique back there. But it really is the size that has stuck out to me more than anything else. I've seen Kevin Adams back there quite a bit as well. And as well as I believe Joshua Moore. That's kind of the safety groupings that I've seen. I remember really liking Kevin Adams this time during training camp last year. And we saw a little bit of him in the Military Bowl, but you really get to see what a year of coaching and learning behind these guys really can do for some of them. And then at cornerback, uh, for the lineups I jotted down the other day, Jai Eugene Jr. was starting, and then I kind of jotted down both Rayshawn Pleasant and Jaheim Johnson as the starters opposite of him. And then at that spear role, it was anchor last year with Cam Pettisflow, primarily seeing Caleb Bransaw from Troy. But that's only a couple of the lineups that I charted. Again, it's hard to say, am I focusing on who's getting substituted in? It almost kind of is like simulating sideline reporting in a way, where I'm typically used to having the play-by-play guy, having the color analyst, and then I can kind of focus my eyes on something perhaps more specialized and something that I have that advantage from that sideline viewpoint. And so that's really allowed me, for example, when Tulane's on defense, obviously Corey has to follow the football and call that play. Steve's oftentimes looking at the coverage, how the wide receivers are playing downfield. And so I've kind of taken on a lot of the time on the defensive side of things. That's not to say they're not paying attention. It's entirely the opposite, but it's easier said than done calling a game, figuring out where to look and what to observe, and how different that is from when I would cover Saints games in the press box. A, I would have my binoculars. B, I would have my notebook and my computer. Whereas when I'm doing sideline reporting, it's all off the cuff. And so I did chart the first day, as I said, but today I use my phone for voice memos, and that's kind of what I go back to. But I really just wanted to settle in and do a little less charting, if you will, and just a little more observing on who's standing out, what the tempo is, what the vibes are of this new coaching staff, and what the competitiveness is like. Because, honestly, all of it is starting from square one. And I think we would be having an entirely different conversation here if there was an established quarterback in place, either from the season prior, someone that was, John Summerall's guy from a previous place. But we are unsure at this time. And it doesn't, we're not really far enough into camp, especially when you consider that it is a three-man race. I think it's safe to say that the front runners right now are Ty Thompson and Kai Horton. All that being said, Darian Mensah has shown quite a bit of promise, a little bit of, inaccuracy here and there, but quite frankly, so have all three of the quarterbacks at times. It stuck out to me. I was watching one of the drills today. It was just one of those simple accuracy drills for the quarterback where it's that net type thing with three slots at different, there's for sure a word for this. You see Drew Brees do this in videos all the time, but, put cones down, make sure you have the proper footwork, and then, one of your three aiming points. And there was two throws in a row where Ty Thompson just hit that middle basket time and time again. And the other quarterbacks are kind of struggling with that. And it's not to say that that translates to a football skill, because it's a live human being that is moving in real time when you're in an actual game setting. But when you look at some of the misses or things like that, we're 4 days into spring camp. Ty Thompson had an off-season procedure that affected his ability to play fully in some of the team drills that we saw. Although today it did stick out that they did put him out there in those simulated pressure settings. We actually got to see quite a bit of promise from him today, as well as Kai Horton. I just don't think we are anywhere close to being able to solve that question. So it's really curious to me, because I've talked about the fact that I have covered a previous quarterback competition. The big difference there, yes, it was the NFL. Sean Payton being this pillar of the New Orleans Saints, of this culture that was upheld. And I've said that it stuck out when I attended, even though I didn't have kind of that control of what a training camp with Drew Brees would have felt like. It felt so business as usual, despite a quarterback competition that we were all trying to cover. And this quarterback that had been starting here for 15 years, took this team to a Super Bowl, saved a city from a hurricane. It was all that anyone was used to. But Sean Payton was there. His coaching staff was there. And a lot of the players, yes, it was a long period of time. Not really any of the players from the Super Bowl are around, but it wasn't essentially starting from scratch in the way that you're really seeing just silly putty sitting there at Tulane. That's both beautiful and, I'm sure for coaches, a little bit stressful when you want those answers. You want to be able to build on things. But the reality is, as I kind of alluded to before, the only real thing that I can point to from last year that's a for sure thing, probably the defensive line has the most returnees and an idea to really get a sense of who will line up there and rotate at minimum is running back. And that was really only running back one. One of the things from last season was there really wasn't this sense of RB2, who really was that guy behind Mekhi Hughes. It's easier said than done to figure out both of those roles. And it just continues to remain very crazy that there was really no drop off from a generational talent in Tajay Spears. That's how critical Mekhi Hughes continues to be. And we saw a little bit of evolution, at least today, with how they were using the running backs out in space, but you don't really get a sense of who really was that guy behind him. It was another one of those rooms by committee. There were injuries here and there to Shoddy Clayton Johnson that I think affected things a little. Arnold Barnes was someone that was really exciting to watch throughout fall camp. And he had some very exciting runs last year, including maybe, if not the longest run of the year, probably Mekhi Hughes broke that at some point, but like a 60-something yard run against Ole Miss. And you could just see really what that potential was. It's worth noting Shoddy Clayton Johnson has been in a non-contact jersey, one of the red jerseys. I'm not entirely sure if there's anything to be said there, but you've seen quite a bit of Arnold Barnes really be that guy behind Mekhi Hughes. Other than that, there is really no holdover from last season. And that can't be seen further than the offensive line to me. Because of injuries last year, you're actually getting a little bit of continuity in a way that you might not expect. We haven't seen Rashad Green practicing. I think that he's recovering from something as well, but you had Josh Remetich and Shadre Hurst coming back. Other than that, you're filling left tackle, right tackle, and center, which is the most important position. And Josh Remetich is that starting right guard. You have such a versatile guy in Shadre Hurst. Yes, he could play center, but then who's playing left guard kind of thing, where we saw him come in a lot last year for Prince Pines. I'm there. At that left guard role, we know that that's a really strong spot for him. So you actually have a little bit of consistency there today. And I'd seen them kind of switching off between Shadre Hurst and Josh Remetich at center earlier last week. This week, or at least today, it was pointedly transfer Vincent Murphy at that center role. And that's really good to see that they're getting a sense of what this line is going to look like. At left tackle, I saw mostly Trey Tuggle. And then on that right tackle side, you saw Sully Burns. So I'll be curious to see if that really starts to get solidified as the days go on, because you do really have to kind of figure out that before you can build the offense, find the quarterback. From a reporter's perspective, it is a very fascinating thing to cover, just all of this turnover. And then, as I was kind of saying with the quarterback competition, because when you have all this turnover, you look to who those leaders were from the past. And yes, you have leaders all over a team. That's not to say that it has to be the quarterback, but the reality is it is the guy that everyone looks to at the end of the day. It's the most important position on the field. You see the impact that Michael Pratt had on a daily basis, just making guys better around him, making everyone want to play and fight for one another. And you're starting to see, again, the buildings of that. It's one of those things that I'm vacillating between. You're seeing it continue and you're seeing it build in its own way, because all of the things from prior years, yes, there is a culture. Yes, there is a standard, but is that John Summerall's standard? I'm not sure that it is. I had come away from today thinking that it was a really strong practice. We are obviously on the outside for a reason. It's kind of hearing what he was saying, both to the team and then in the media. If it was just to the team, I wouldn't be saying anything. But, the fact that these guys, some of them don't know all the plays. And he was very disappointed in that there were guys that weren't sure where to line up. And again, granted, it is day 4 of spring camp. This is so much turnover, so many new guys out there, and yet it's not good enough for him. He felt like the physicality really wasn't there on Saturday as much as he would have liked to. And so it was good to see that that was something that came out today. And if I were to have a takeaway from today's practice, it would 100% be that I keep saying that there is this intensity and this tempo with this new coaching staff. And maybe there's a necessity of more team drills than you would expect with a quarterback competition, but it's really allowing you to really paint a picture of who we can see emerge as playmakers on this roster. And as I said before, yes, I usually pay attention to the defense, but shout out to Terez Traynor today, who completely caught my attention at wide receiver. He's a transfer over from, let me make sure I have this correctly, Idaho. I wanted to make sure there wasn't a northern, southern. Yes, over from Idaho. And he just to me was really my player of the day, if you will. He had several really great catches where it was in traffic. He was able to locate the high point between two defenders that was thrown to him by Ty Thompson. And it just continued throughout the day. You saw all of the receivers' real ability to separate at the line of scrimmage. When I walked into practice, they were working on, one-on-one press coverage drills and the use of hands and really quick footwork immediately by these guys. It's not these things where they're using their speed downfield to separate. They're using jukes, moves, and press coverage skills at the line of scrimmage in order to separate from these defensive backs. And I think that really breeds healthy competition between both the wide receivers and the quarterback. And you really get to see what a guy's toughness is. I just remember Chris Brazel last year around this time. You could really see in those one-on-one drills, wow, okay, first of all, he has a foot on a lot of the guys around him, but in a different way than I was used to seeing Chris Brazel the year prior, which was just his freshman year, and he was hurt. He had this physicality and he just had this want to lean into contact, to fight through contact. And it was that little step up that caught my eye. You could really say that about all of the wide receivers that have been out there that we've been able to observe so far. We didn't see Shaz Preston today. John Summerall did note that he's just dealing with some type of bruise in his back. It's nothing serious, because he was someone that I really had my eye drawn to last week as well. First of all, his build is he's a transfer wide receiver over from Alabama. I did actually look this up earlier because while I haven't had that much time to look into the defensive backs, I've been really curious to see, after talking with Lance Robinson, my last interview this last Friday, him mentioning the bootleggers 7-on-7s, it just made me think. I had written down one day that all of these defensive backs seem to be coming from Louisiana. Did any of them play on any 7-on-7 teams together? I was able to see that Jai Eugene was on the bootleggers, as well as I think one of the other defensive backs, but Shaz Preston also was out there on the team. So that was something that caught my eye. And thinking back to Lance Robinson's comments about JJ McCleskey coaching the offense and perhaps having a little bit of insight into what Shaz Preston was able to do, but just his body type, his build, he has such a strong lower body. It's kind of not that typical thin build that you're used to at wide receiver. And to have these guys have different body types, it's not just all kind of the same guy, because you have your really speedy, shorter body type in Mario Williams, very similar to how Jaquan Jackson was able to move. And then we're not even getting to Yokeith Brown. And quite honestly, Garrett Mamahat and Fat Watts have had really strong camps so far. And I know, again, that guys, it's easier to look like a standout in spring camp and, if you don't really see any playing time the next year. But I thought that Garrett Mamahat really had potential, looking at his very quick switch over to wide receiver in just fall camp last season. He'd been playing quarterback up to that point in his life, and he made some really sick catches today. But Fat Watts just has a very different looking body as well. He tore his ACL last year. He wasn't able to play throughout the season. He ended up temporarily leaving the team. And when I kind of wrap this up on, what I'm really looking forward to covering with this team, it's kind of talking, with him after practice and his decision to come back, talking with Gary Smith from NOLA.com and just kind of observing these things. But it's like a kid in a candy shop. And now I understand what Ty Thompson was talking about when I saw him in that press conference right before spring camp started, where when they got out here for the first time and started throwing with these wide receivers, it was really easy to get excited about this offense. And as an observer, I am inclined to agree. It has already been extremely fascinating to watch how it shouldn't be a slant is an exciting route, but there were some times last year where it just kind of felt like, all right, let's just stretch the field laterally. Let's spread out this defense. You just kind of get those short things to keep us moving downfield. And a lot of the time there were kind of those longer developing routes where guys really had to get downfield to separate. At least, again, there's no pressure. You can simulate pressure in practice. It really does not matter until you actually have guys in your face. But looking at the concepts that Joe Craddock has been running, there was a point today where I thought that Kai Horton was about to throw a pick. It was either Kai or Ty. Very hard to keep those two together. All that to say, my observation wasn't so much on the throw. It was, oh, he misread that route. Never mind, just kidding. Mario Williams is exactly where he needed to be. Therese Trainer just kind of ran a crossing route. there and vacated the space for him. And when you have guys that all have the pedigree and the ability that we've been able to see, there was also Sean Nicholas. His press coverage skills stuck out to me today as well. There was just one point where he just completely shut down DK Magruder at defensive back with just very violent hands at the line of scrimmage, crossed his chest, and he was kind of home free. Unfortunately, didn't end up catching the ball, but it just, when you have that type of personnel, you heard John Summerall saying how, they're talking about running 10 and 11 personnel because they have the wide receivers to do so. They have the wide receivers to do so, and they have the concepts in order to get creative with them. They ran a flea flicker today. I literally have a voice memo of me shouting, "Flea flicker, let's go." Not again, it fell short, but seeing the idea, seeing just their willingness to go for it and implement that in day 4 of spring practice. And a lot of time today was focused on getting the running backs out in space with just kind of out to the flat passes. We saw quite a bit of time last year, but these felt just a little more intentional, a little more by design, and not all the time with them, lining up wide in the backfield. And you could tell that Mekhi Hughes, he's just a little faster this year. Has just a little more shimmy to him. But you really got to see both sides get competitive today. And I thought, even though I wasn't really paying that much attention to the defense, I noted that they were starting to really kind of make their presence known as the day went on, specifically Tyler Grubbs really shutting down those running backs in space. You think back to the run defense of Tulane last year, and a lot of that had to do with that front 7. And like I said, you could point to Elijah Champagne, Adonis Freelou, Eric Hicks, several, Patrick Jenkins. Hello. There is another player on the interior that I'm having a complete Cam Hamilton. We know what we're getting, at least for a lot of the meat of that defensive line. And then, yes, we're not entirely sure what the linebacker situation is opposite Tyler Grubbs, even though we've seen Dixon Agu get a lot of those snaps. You know that you have Tyler Grubbs there. He played in the Ole Miss game where they completely shut down Jenkins during that matchup. And so seeing that really continue and that intensity today, but the pass breakups by the defensive backs, just more than one time I noted. Jaheim Johnson had one. I think Kevin Adams had one today. I have several from last week, but it's one of those things of, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it really good competition on wide receiver side? Is it really good competition on the defensive back side? And I think the answer is both. And covering teams for the last couple of years, both at the college and the NFL level, you can really see the benefit of having that elite coverage corner on your team be able to go up against your top wide receiver and have that really good competition within your own team. And as much as you can't really simulate what Mike Detillier, one of my guests that came on the show last season, referred to as just pajamas and slippers, especially in the trenches, you still can get a really good sense of what a team is and how they operate. And despite not really having a starting quarterback at the helm, to already feel like you can get an idea of what the identity of this offense is going to be, and that they really mean what they say when they said, we're going to base this around the strengths of our personnel. And to that point, putting all these wide receivers out there and getting them in space, using them off one another, using those concepts to create those routes in space for each other, but also just having that initial separation off the line of scrimmage, having the ability to throw to the running backs out in space. It just is a really cohesive and seamless thing so far. But as I said before, I thought it was a great practice. I thought it was relatively intense, and I don't know these new plays. I don't know a lot of these new players. So as I said before, it was a little surprising to hear at the end that there was some disappointment from the coaching staff in these guys, but it goes to show how much there really is to learn, both for these players and for myself, and what you can really get out of spring camp about an identity of a team and a coaching staff all at one fell swoop. It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of a podcast and think, of course they like the product, they're paid to. Well, if you know me at all, then you know 2 things. 1, I'm truthful, almost to a fault. And 2, if I were in it for the money, I would certainly be doing something else. So believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location, yes, all of that. And I have made a very most recent trip and can co-sign to that all. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites, from the smoker fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials I may or may not have surveyed every single one of each and every week. So go check them out. Blue Oak Barbecue, located at 900 North Carrollton here in New Orleans, or visit them online at blueoakbarbecue.com. We are cooking up something special in the drink category over at Blue Oak. But as you know, I always do, let's run through your specials for the month of March. So as always on Mondays, you got Trinity red beans and rice. Tuesdays, pimientos rellenos. I'm surprised no one has laughed at me for this horrible pronunciation by now, which is a brisket stuffed pepper. Brisket Reuben on Wednesdays, a barbecue baked potato on Thursdays, redfish roll on Fridays, half a jerk chicken on Saturday, and a full English breakfast on Sunday. So with that, pip pip, cheerio, go get you some barbecue. As I said, it's been 4 days. It has quite literally been 4 days of practice, 2-hour practices at once. That's what, 8 total hours that I've been able to watch of this new Green Wave team, and not just new Green Wave team, but entirely new coaching staff. And so that's kind of as far as my takeaways can go on the field. But it did strike me that off the field, their standard is perhaps higher than I expected it. Again, John Summerall talking with the media after practice today, saying, he acknowledges that his expectations are probably a little advanced for where they are, but he wants the team to be a lot further along than he felt like they were today. And, just guys still misaligning and not really knowing where to go, not getting to the line really quickly, and just feeling like that intensity and dialed in-ness isn't necessarily there, and being pretty tough on them after practice as a result of that. And then again, speaking very candidly to us about that. And it was just very fascinating to me to hear this, where, with Willie, he had a standard, he had a culture, and he had these guys on the roster from that he had recruited, that he had coached, and there really was no question. And that's not to say that there's a question now, because if nothing else, the command and poise of this new coaching staff, it just has felt so seamless in a way that is almost bizarre, because I feel like it should feel a little more like a transition. But that's just from my observations looking in. But it's really just fascinating to hear a coach just kind of be candid about the fact that his expectations might not be as reasonable as you might think, but that doesn't mean that he still can't have them, and he's not going to be holding his team to that standard. And that's where that accountability and that idea of brotherhood and tough love, it has to come from everyone being their best selves every day. We've heard John Summerall say the only disability in life is having a bad attitude. And you can see that in the way that he approaches these types of things at practice, with wanting guys to be a little more physical, wanting guys to be further along, and just being candid about the fact that, you won't be seeing the field if you don't know the playbook, which obviously, but it would be one thing if we were having these conversations in August, and that might be cause for alarm. But it's 4 days into spring camp. I'm not taking that much stock in it. I'm also not a coach, but what I'm taking away from it is that I think that coaches have to establish their own swagger, their own attitude, their own command of a place. And John Summerall is, he's been a head coach before, but still relatively younger, relatively newer. And this is his second stint at it after being a 2-year head coach, and coming here, not having a quarterback, and having to establish this culture, this standard, when the standard for success now has a different level with the college football playoffs opening this year, and giving Tulane perhaps a different dream than they were able to have in the past. And you really do need to be acting like, if you're not ready for the college football playoffs right now, then we're not going to be ready for them come August, whenever the schedule opens. Because fact is, I've talked about this gauntlet. I went on WDSU. I did their Game On with Kendall Duncan on Sunday night. I posted it on my socials talking about this gauntlet that they have to open up the year, where you're going to learn a lot about this team, and they're going to have to learn a lot about themselves very quickly, with their second game of the year hosting Kansas State and then going down to Oklahoma and having to beat an SEC team. If you lose those games, then you're really looking at having to go completely zero margin of error leading forward. And maybe there's another front runner in line for the college football playoffs. If you win one of those games, it changes the conversation quite a bit. If you win both of them and then you don't run the table on the rest of the schedule, it would be a little mystifying, considering that, again, Tulane Yes, they didn't win the conference championship last year, but the team that did is not here anymore. And they were the ones that hosted it. And I just be honest, they are the ones to beat. They are the ones that are going to continue to be hunted. And it doesn't matter that Michael Pratt's gone. It doesn't matter that Willie Fritz is gone. And I think that's really the point of what John Summerall is getting at here, where when we look at this team and we talk about how to really build this culture, this identity, and the idea that they really still have to earn everything, that nothing's been given to them. And whatever we have of these ideas of these previously coached teams, you can't really apply that to these guys here, except they don't really have that much time to get all of these questions answered, as far off as the season might seem. But ultimately perception matters. And that opening slate is really going to, I think, just dictate the season for these guys. And regardless of whether or not they win those games, they're still going to be the hunted in conference play. But that's where you just really look at, you are straight in line for the college football playoffs when you're in that type of conversation. And so, yeah, it is reasonable to expect that the standard be really high here at Tulane. But you can set really high standards. You can be really tough on guys, but there's a reason that tough love is a two-pronged term. Oftentimes it's misused, and I think it's a lot of the time used to cover up bad behavior. Sometimes people say, oh, this is just tough love. This is just tough love. Really just kind of using that as a shield to berate people, if I'm being honest. But I think that there is sincere merit in that, especially when you look at the fact that John Summerall has said, one of his 4 pillars of his coaching is that idea of love. We've heard it in several of his speeches to these guys. We've seen it out on the field now, but it was really kind of cool to just see that display in almost a microcosm setting where, he was asked about Fat Watts by Gary Smith after practice today, after talking about kind of the culture and the expectations and really wanting to be this tough, disciplined team, as someone that, has been kind of standing out these last couple of weeks. And, it was one of those conversations where, continuing to be super candid with us, it's very fascinating as a reporter to have a head coach that is just so willing to let us in on these things. And saying that, it's not a guaranteed thing for Fat Watts, and talking about what kind of went wrong last year and just the idea of a clean slate and a fresh opportunity. And that's a sentiment that was echoed in the press conference that I went to by both Mario Williams and Ty Thompson. I think that this idea kind of rebirth for a lot of these guys is taking place on this team this year. Perhaps that's building themselves their career after kind of sitting on the bench. It's for someone like Mario Williams saying that he really wanted to feel that love and relationship with his coaching staff. And then for someone like Fat Watts, he got injured and then things kind of happened last year. He ends up leaving the team and he has an opportunity now. And he's really made the most out of that. But when talking with him, as he came in afterwards, asking what really was it that made you want to come back here, the answer was love. He felt the love from this new coaching staff, and he already knows that he has that love for this team and for this game that kind of got overshadowed by everything last year. But to hear him say that that was really one of the reasons for him wanting to come back here and just feeling like that love is really taking place here. I just feel like when you're really able to implement the idea of love into football, that's really where you start to get a sense of culture. And I'm deviating into buzzword territory with all of this that I am really saying here, but without that love aspect, it's very hard to hold guys accountable. I just will point everyone back to Nick Anderson. When I had a conversation with him, to write one of my draft articles on him, really just asking about that greatest single season turnaround. And what they really had to get down to at the end of the day was they all had to really love each other and be brothers, because that's the only way that you can really look a guy, one-on-one in the eye and say, you need to be better today, and have that really go over well and know that they can be better than that and be able to have that conversation. But to feel like that is also something that is being brought down from this new coaching staff to the point where these guys are wanting to repair their relationships with, college football, with themselves, perhaps here under this at Tulane. And those tough moments are going to be what end up making or breaking a team at the end of the day. Does it have to be as tough as a hurricane evacuation and going from 2-10 to 12-2? Probably not. But even just looking at a quarterback competition, those tough moments, those guys having a bad day, not feeling like the standard is being met day 4 into spring camp, it's very, very low on the tough moments scale. But this is really where you need to start building that sense of grit, because you can't get to August, September, and not really know if your team is battle tested or not. And while you can't get a lot of those answers until you really truly do take that first snap, I think to his points about getting to the line quickly, just taking the extra time to make sure that they're really dialed in to the playbook. Those are those small details that he brought up in his introductory press conference about seeing that that really wasn't the case when he was first at Tulane, but then on his second stint here, really being able to tell the difference, pointing to things like the new speaker system that they're still carrying over, handing the ball, going and retrieving it, and handing it over to the refs. Those are the small details alongside those big things like love and tough love, accountability, what have you. But those small details to me are what really are the icing on the cake. But if you have a cake without icing, it's not really a finished product there. And so to see almost as much attention paid to these little details, just these little types of things, this is going to be what makes or breaks these guys. Are they able to lock in March and April and get through these kind of hard things on a day-by-day basis where you might not understand the playbook that well, but you know that your coach wants the best out of you and knows the potential that you can reach. It's one thing to get on guys for not doing their job. It's another thing for the way that it's said and that it really speaks to knowing what they are truly able to do. I think that that just breeds these guys wanting to come back, wanting to work harder. The fact that we heard that he felt like the intensity wasn't really there on Saturday and that was really ramped up today. It was freezing cold, 44 degrees. And I know if you're in the East Coast and you're cackling hysterically listening to me right now, but we are not built for this down in the South. I'm from the Bay Area, and there is just something about the humid cold here and the intense temperature dropped when I was wearing shorts to practice last week. Legitimately being in multiple layers today at practice. And I mean, I was frozen. To think that these guys out there in shorts and a t-shirt aren't absolutely freezing as well would be really ridiculous to think about. And I think back to like that UCF loss in the 2022 year. This doesn't have anything to say this is the reason that they lost, but you could just tell that literal brain freeze seemed to be taking place for Tulane. And it stuck out that UCF had a lot of heaters on their bench, which we started to see from Tulane after the fact of that game. It is those small details that matter. Guys being extremely cold, not being able to think through things. So to see that they were still being super competitive today, even though the conditions, and again, I know that I sound so absurdly dramatic right now, but it's the same thing when we're going to get to June. And these guys think that they understand summers, even if they're from the South. There is just simply nothing like Louisiana in the months July through what feels like way too long. That'll really be another time where we get to see what these guys are made of. But just to give all that context, the fact that I have learned this much in just 4 days total of time where I don't know most of these players, I don't know most of these coaches, and yet you're still able to take all of these takeaways and feel like you're truly learning something about this team one snap at a time. Truly all you can ask for day 4 of spring camp. So I'm going to be kind of continuing my format of having these episodes again come out on Wednesdays and have my guest episodes on Friday. Being able to kind of go back and look through the last couple of days of practice, I think really just helps me get this holistic picture of seeing a team be built in real time. And I look forward to continuing to share that all with y'all.